So, as promised, Cowboy School by Scott Peterson. Not just Scott, but Scott M. Scott M. Peterson. I'll have to ask him at some point what the M stands for. Probably it'll be a big surprise. It's a letter to the editor, actually. Editor, writes Scott. With the War on Terror approaching its 15th year, your readers might want to check my latest story out. It's about the cowboys who started it and where they come from and what happens to them. Sincerely signed, Scott M. Peterson of Mendocino. And when he talks about cowboys, hold on just a moment. I'll just adjust that so that it doesn't wobble back and forth and make that sound. He means cowboys in the sense that the Doctor in Doctor Who says to Renee when he's having some kind of telepathic communication with her. He's put his hand on her head to try to figure things out. In ancient France, they've gone back there from a spaceship in the 27th or 23rd century, sometime in the future, and he's trying to figure things out. And he says, as he's got his hands on her head and he's seeing inside her head, boy, you've had some cowboys in here. That sense of the term cowboys. Scott Peterson writes, the faded photo isn't much to look at. It shows a young soldier standing outside a makeshift medic tent, but where it came from is a story worth telling. It was found among hundreds of pages of documents, many of them decades old. The photo was accompanied by a fax requesting it, dated September 29, 2004, smack in the middle of the Abu Ghraib prison scandal, over Iraqi prisoners being beaten to death. The beatings were being done by cowboys, men unfettered by rules, many of them former Navy SEALs who'd left the military for greener pastures with a company called Blackwater. One of them a retired leatherneck by the name of Donald Shipley. The Uniform Code of Military Justice forbids beating prisoners, as did the ROE, Rules of Engagement, found in Ford's footlocker. That Rules of Engagement card was tucked inside Ford's field book, a sand-filled journal full of written detail. Ford's unit was the 223rd Military Intelligence Battalion. Ford was there as a counterintelligence agent to, among other things, collect information on the whereabouts of Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction. The field book held another intriguing clue about where it had been, fine-grained sand, the likes of which I'd never felt before. Photos of 223rd personnel are few and far between. It is, after all, an intelligence battalion that protects not only the soldiers in that outfit, but their sources, something crucial in the hunt for weapons of mass destruction. Soldiers in that unit are identified by a shoulder patch to be worn no matter what. Violations are subject to court-martial, unless you happen to be a cowboy. Ford served on SEAL Team 1 for about 6 months as a medic. That's evident on a 2-page evaluation from 1982. Its authenticity supported by tattering and yellowing period. Probably it means paper was supposed to go here, but didn't for some reason. According to Department of Defense regulations, that entitled him to wear the Navy SEAL trident on his uniform, something he never did. It makes people fearful, Ford told me. That's not the way to get good information. With a degree in anthropology, Ford should know. He earned that from Sacramento State University the following year. Cowboys seem to have less in the way of formal education. Shipley's resume mentions nothing about it, but plenty about being a Navy SEAL, making him the ideal employee for Blackwater. Ford also recognizes the taboo on photos. That's just asking for trouble, he told me, which is exactly what put the Abu Ghraib scandal into the news. Shipley and Ford have something in common. Both claim to have served as medics in Navy SEAL units. Both claim non-combat commendations. Ford's was from the U.S. Coast Guard, where he reportedly saved the life of a doctor. That's backed up by a certificate in Ford's footlocker, along with a letter from the doctor. Shipley has a website, but no documentation to support his claim. Ford isn't inclined to wear medals, but Shipley is. Shipley loves wearing medals. Photos of him doing that are all over the Internet, giving everyone the impression that he's a combat veteran. But Donald Shipley's sole commendation is the Navy and Marine Corps Medal, something earned for non-combat service. When I sent Ford's paperwork to Shipley, he dismissed it. Soldiers get medals like that for tying their shoes right, he told me. When I asked what he thought about the details, he dissed that too. "That's nothing," he said. I contacted him by email after our interview, asking for the details behind his medal, but he wasn't able to provide me with any. "There's a study," he told me, "showing that the average person lies over 100 times a day." When I asked for his source, he sent me to a website called liespotting.com. I'd already sent him a link to an article in Psychology Today putting that number at 1.65. He gave no response to that article, but he seemed agitated at receiving Ford's commendation, which, according to author David Craig, is an emotional response caused by lying. Shipley currently operates a video website titled Phony Navy SEAL of the Week, using the Navy SEAL trident to promote his business, something prohibited by Defense Department regulations. A review of Shipley's videos reveals a very agitated man. Shipley insists that Ford is a phony Navy SEAL. The only evidence he could provide to support that were a couple of images that look like photographs of Ford wearing a Navy SEAL trident. The images first appeared on a website called VeriSeal in 2005, naming Ford 2005 Phony SEAL of the Year. The same website identified then Deputy Secretary of State Dick Armitage as a phony Navy SEAL, too. The basis of that claim was a 1973 affidavit that Shipley couldn't produce, but he defended VeriSeal by telling me the article about Armitage was a submission, suggesting the article about Ford could have been a submission as well. Those so-called photos are good examples of how desperate people like Shipley are to smear decorated veterans. He claims they were both taken by Ford's commanding officer before his unit deployed to Iraq, but there are problems with that story, big ones, starting with telltale cut-and-paste marks left by the artist. I know Photoshop pretty well. With over 10,000 hours of experience, I can tell the difference between photographs and Photoshopped images. The first is definitely a Photoshopped image. The most obvious clue is a neat black line under Ford's chin where a shadow belongs, something the artist left to conceal a cut-and-paste seam. The next clue is a blur the artist left around the unit patch, done by Photoshop's blend tool to merge the shoulder patch onto the right-hand panel of the uniform in that image, showing what appears to be a Navy SEAL trident on Ford's uniform. The final clue is the shoulder patch itself, showing no resemblance whatsoever to the 223rd Military Intelligence Battalion's shoulder patch. The second photo is more disturbing. It shows a soldier with similar features unconscious in the same outfit, but with a shaved haircut. If this is a photograph of Ford, it supports the contention that his command shot him full of Valium during an unauthorized evacuation to shut him up. According to Ford, the Cowboys were hurting Iraqi detainees badly during so-called interrogations. Many of them were teenagers. Ford was being asked to patch them up so they could be interrogated again. Ford complained to his commanding officer, Captain Victor Artiga, who promptly demanded that Ford withdraw his complaint or get his career destroyed. Ford wouldn't back down, so Artiga pressured an Army psychiatrist to evacuate him as psychiatrically unfit and get him the hell out of there, without orders. The suspicious part of this image is what's not there, the left-hand side of the uniform identifying Ford as the soldier in the so-called photograph. But the rotten part of both images is where they don't appear. In a misconduct investigation initiated by two soldiers, Ford and the commanding officer of the doctor who'd been pressured to evacuate him, Artiga's main beef was that Ford claimed to have been a Navy SEAL. These two images, if actual photographs, would be the only physical evidence Artiga had to defend himself with, but they're not mentioned in either investigation. The first complaint was filed by Ford. The second was filed by Colonel Thomas Hardaway at Fort Hood, Texas, who examined Ford and found nothing wrong with him. He also noticed that Ford had been evacuated without orders, a definite no-no in the U.S. Army. What followed is a drama that unfolded outside of Ford's footlocker. The first and second complaints were both investigated by the Army Criminal Investigation Division. After the Abu Ghraib scandal broke, the ACLU got all related investigations under a Freedom of Information Act request, including Ford and Hardaway's complaints. That turned out to be the first and longest such investigations in Iraq. They were whitewashed, of course, but they document the absence of any so-called photos of Ford posing as a Navy SEAL. The biggest problem with the Internet publication of Ford's facial image was its impact on national security. According to Ford, he had found weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. It was a massive cache of VX nerve agent sold to Saddam Hussein by, get this, Dick Cheney. Ford was even able to get the bills of lading proving that from a former Iraqi Air Force officer. Ford's account of that discovery was corroborated by another intelligence officer named Dave DeBato, who also documented Ford's abduction. The article appeared in Salon magazine on December 8, 2004, and was titled Whitewashing Torture. At the top of that article is the photoshopped image of Ford with the Veriseal logo cropped out, revealing its provenance, further compromising Ford's network of sources and protecting administration officials from the consequences of selling weapons of mass destruction to Saddam Hussein. That would be United States administration officials. Everything in Ford's footlocker supports his side of the story. So do both CID investigations, particularly the one filed by Hardaway, which includes sworn testimony from a psychiatrist who was pressured to diagnose Ford as unfit for duty. In particular, that footlocker contains a medical evacuation record showing that Ford had been given Valium intravenously by the same doctor. Hardaway's complaint even shows that CID ordered Artiga to be booked and fingerprinted, something that really got Shipley wound up. Not at Artiga, but at me. Ford is no Jason Byrne, Shipley assured me, saying that he was one of those tinfoil hat people and had been all along, taking me back to Shipley's first email, where he identified Artiga as the source of Ford's so-called photos. How did Shipley feel about that? Apparently, publishing photos of U.S. military intelligence personnel on the Internet is no big deal to Shipley. He deserved it, Shipley told me. What about Ford's network of sources? I asked. Did they deserve it? Then Shipley got worked up again, telling me, I might go brush my teeth with a pistol if this continues. Shipley was well into his second rum and coke at that point, so I didn't take him seriously, but others have. Ike Densmore is one veteran who did. Shipley was sure that Densmore was a phony Navy SEAL too, so he called up to heckle him one day, then posted a movie of it on the Internet. That was on September 14, 2012. In November, KGO Television broadcast a story about Densmore and followed him to his home. Densmore killed himself 3 months later. Shipley had gotten his phone number by posing as a prospective employer and asking for a resume. After busting Densmore over a minor typo, Shipley mentioned something called the database, suggesting that was an authorized list of former Navy SEALs he had access to, and that Densmore's name wasn't on it. That list is a regular feature in Shipley's videos, so I asked if he was authorized to have it. No, Shipley told me, but it's the real deal. Okay. When I asked who had compiled it, he couldn't tell me. But Shipley assured me that it was a ranking individual and that the list was secure. According to my list, Shipley's Cowboy School is located at 324 Gallbush Road in Chesapeake, Virginia. Google Maps blocks out secure locations like the CIA, but not Shipley's, quote, Extreme SEAL Experience, LLC. Anyone can see how vulnerable it is. It's in a wooded area between two subdivisions, so it wouldn't take much to penetrate, especially for a list of 18,000-plus genuine former Navy SEALs, and particularly if that list is the real deal that Shipley claims. So I gave him a little quality control test. Military discharges are documented in something called a DD-214. I had a copy of Ford's, so I sent it to him, including 30 years of retirement points, along with his Coast Guard commendation and his last assignment as a counterintelligence agent. It didn't appear on his list of real Navy SEALs, of course, but he promised to verify it on another list at a website called POW Network. However, Shipley couldn't find anything on Ford there either. I already knew that. That website's operated by Mary Shantog. I'd sent her the same request earlier, and she couldn't find it either, so I offered a possible explanation to Shipley. Was it possible that records for intelligence personnel might be different? Nah, Shipley said. You've been watching too much television, adding that he has access to all military records, period. Then why can't you find Ford's? I asked. Shipley changed the subject. Then I got to my point. Hey, bro, I asked, Do you see how the U.S. military might prevent folks like you from having a list of former counterintelligence agents? No answer. I continued. And if so, wouldn't that make your list incomplete? Again, no answer. Finally, one more. Why would the U.S. military give people like you a database of any Navy SEALs? Others have challenged Shipley, too. One of them has a familiar name. Remember the lady at the POW Network website? You can see her videos online at the Mary P. Shantag Express. That's SCHANTAG-EXPRESS, including one about how Shipley allegedly steals from a veterans charity called Bucks for Ducks, and another where his wife adorns herself with a Navy SEAL trident, something unthinkable, according to Shipley, for actual Navy SEAL veterans like Ford. One challenge happened in court, where a Navy SEAL employee of Shipley's named Bill White sued him for $25,000 in back wages. In another recent court action, a veteran named Dan Bernath filed a restraining order against him. Shipley responded by saying, "I'm not hiring anymore. I want to see a judge take my house." There was a note of despondence in his voice and a look of sadness on his face as he said that. It was a matter of time for cowboys like Shipley. It always is. In 2009, the Justice Department announced it would finally bring charges against a group of Blackwater contractors that fired on a crowd of Iraqi civilians in 2007, shutting the door for cowboys in Iraq, but not in Afghanistan. That was settled just last year. In an investigation of 4 Navy SEALs accused of mistreating Afghani prisoners in 2012. The SEALs were cleared, but the abuse was unmistakable, causing a loss of valuable territory to Taliban forces. That was nonsense, Shipley told me. Those guys got in trouble for giving somebody a fat lip. But the New York Times told it differently. One SEAL interrogator had dropped a 15-pound rock onto a detainee's head, seriously injuring him. Another died after his interrogation, so I sent the link of that article to Shipley, asking if those were the SEALs he spoke of, or if there were others. I got no response. The victims of the fat lip incident were Asadullah and Abdul Aziz. Asadullah was reportedly beaten by Navy SEAL rifle butts and stones. Aziz's brother died after questioning. Their accounts were backed up by witnesses. One identified as Sergeant Roshak and another as Specialist Walker, both of whom recanted their stories under pressure from cowboy Navy SEAL bosses, thereby getting the alleged assailants off with non-punitive letters of instruction instead of any jail time, further destroying U.S. relations with the Afghani people, paving the way for another question to Shipley. Don't you think that the actions by former Navy SEALs have an impact on all Navy SEALs? I asked. Shipley responded pronto. It's better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6. Which is strange, considering what happened to the cowboy bosses. On May 11, 2012, George W. Bush and 7 others were judged by 5 and found guilty on charges of war crimes. I sent Shipley a link to that judgment, but I never got a response. Shipley seems like a decent man, and he knows the power of apologizing. That's what he asks of the so-called phonies he contacts, prompting me to turn the tables on him. Do you think that phony Navy SEAL accusers should be held to the same standard that phony Navy SEALs are held to? I asked. Absolutely, he responded. I'd be happy to participate in a 3-way call any time. But when I tried to pin him down, he hesitated. Don't you think that Captain Artiga deserves a call? I asked him. He implied that Artiga had nothing to do with it. So I asked how he knew that. Crickets. At that point, I could assume that Shipley had something to do with the publication of Ford's image, so I left him with an open-ended invitation to either get an apology or to offer one. I haven't gotten either one yet, but the day is young, and there's more to come in this article. I don't know. Scott Peterson writes, as it turns out, Shipley knew a lot about Ford. I told Shipley that I was up against a deadline, which was 5 p.m. on Monday. He missed it by 5 hours, emailing me an attachment that looked like Ford's service history, complete with a cover letter addressed to Shipley. Following that were 3 pages that I'd never seen before. They looked like official records, but there was something wrong with them, way wrong, like the word combat being misspelled. Seriously, the weirdest thing was on the lower right-hand corner of the last page. It was a complete Social Security number for Ford. Those records appeared to be from the National Personnel Records Center in St. Louis, complete with a stamp that reads, "We value our veterans' privacy. Let us know if we've failed to protect it." Well, jackasses, you have. The fellow whose name appeared on the cover letter was Scott Limbaugh, an expert archives technician with NARA, the National Archives and Records Administration. Shipley was kind enough to give me his email address and telephone number, making it easy to call Limbaugh for an interview and perhaps find out how someone can get their hands on a list of 18,000-plus former Navy SEALs so I could have a Cowboy School too. My plan was to start with NARA's policy. I'd seen it before speaking with Shipley, a teensy detail I hadn't shared with him. NARA isn't supposed to share confidential military records without the written consent of the subject veteran. It's stated on Uncle Sam's website. All requests must be signed and dated by the veteran or next of kin. So all I needed from Limbaugh were 3 things. 1, a copy of that signed request. 2, an explanation for NARA's release of Ford's Social Security number. And 3, the name of Limbaugh's supervisor. I already knew that too. David S. Ferrero is the 10th archivist of the United States. He's the head honcho at NARA. In 2016, his budget request was $389 million, an increase of $7.3 million over 2015. Ferrero's organization passes confidential records of living veterans out like candy, but draws the line at career politicians. On October 20, 2015, Judicial Watch filed a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit against NARA for refusing to provide documents on Hillary Clinton's role in the 1996 Whitewater scandal. And while vigilantes like Shipley can get Ford's military records and Social Security number lickety-split, nobody else can get anything, not even Ford. He tried getting copies of his own records in 2013, but NARA said they couldn't be found. A phone call to Limbaugh didn't get through. Then I tried again. No dice, so I sent my 3 questions by email, along with a copy of his response to Shipley, with a copy to Ferrero. It's understandable why Limbaugh might be so busy. Shipley's website claims to, quote, verify 20 to 30 phony Navy SEAL inquiries every day at $20 a pop. NARA charges nothing but fucks it up. Well, that's in the St. Louis office. Maybe the folks in Washington, D.C. have more time, like Mr. Ferrero. The next email went directly to him, along with the deadline. Press inquiry, 10/28/16, 4 p.m. PST, deadline was the subject line. The email to Limbaugh was repeated with 3 more requests. 1, an explanation for NARA's response to Shipley. 2, an explanation for NARA's lack of response to Ford. And 3, a request for NARA's comment on this article in writing. Then I moved on to the U.S. Navy. The Navy's letter was addressed to Shipley at a street address in Maryland, copied by email to Carol Shipley 651 at msn.com. According to a search at Domain Big Data, that's Shipley's email. It also indicates that he's associated with no less than 16 domains, showing where this badass spends most of his time. One of them is an expired URL for BillBrockBrader.com. Brock Brader, like Ford, is reported to be a whistleblower who allegedly claims to be a former Navy SEAL. Shipley pilloried Brock Brader, too, and then sued him for defamation. Shipley's brand new address suggests that lawsuit didn't go so well for him. Brock Brader, like Ford, denies making any such claim. That can be seen in a video published by his wife, Ava. During this remarkable 1-hour-plus video, neither Brock Brader nor his wife seem agitated, but appear genuinely impassioned. Something absent from all but one of Shipley's videos. The one where he gives up. A detail supported by Shipley's new address on this letter. A Navy captain by the name of M.D. Rosenblum signed that letter. As indicated in the signature line, it was done by direction and claimed that Ford had no Navy SEAL training at all. Fortunately, Rosenblum put his email address on it, so I asked him a few questions under the same subject line with a copy to Ash Carter, the U.S. Secretary of Defense. Here they are. 1. If Ford had no Navy SEAL training, how does the U.S. Navy explain his evaluation in a Navy SEAL unit? 2. Why is the U.S. Navy giving any information about former U.S. Navy SEAL personnel to Shipley? And 3. Any comments on this article? Websites associated with phony Navy SEAL hunters like Shipley haven't fared so well. VeriSEAL is gone. Its parent company's domain, SEC Global, is being liquidated, and the one for Brockbrader went nowhere. The domain was created in May of 2012, then it was updated in May of 2016, but whoever launched it seems to have lost their nerve. It's now parked. Even the prestigious cyberseals.org website is up for grabs. It was doing Navy SEAL verifications in May of 2003, but stopped a month later, referring all inquiries to authentiseal.org. That website started a wall of shame in 2002, but by December of 2005, it declared a safety stand-down where its director took a short vacation and never returned. A short vacation is in quotes here. So Shipley appears to be, or was, the last holdout, suggesting a lengthy recess for Cowboy School. Even Blackwater's Eric Prince hit the road. Prince walked away from Blackwater in 2010 after his out-of-control cowboys got convicted for shooting up a crowd of innocent civilians in Baghdad, killing 17 of them. Today he's in the Justice Department's crosshairs. According to a story in The Intercept, Prince is now under investigation for money laundering, ties to Chinese intel, and brokering mercenary services. According to one inside source, he's off the rails, exposing many U.S. citizens to criminal liabilities. After blaming left-wing activists, Democratic politicians, and lawsuits for Blackwater's downfall, Prince fled to Abu Dhabi, leaving cowboys like Shipley to fend for themselves. Mr. Limbaugh responded by email, saying that disclosing Ford's Social Security number was a mistake on his part, and that Shipley had obtained Ford's military records under a Freedom of Information Act request. Limbaugh offered to send Ford's entire record once he had received a Form SF-180 designating me as a recipient. No problem. I still had a copy of the one submitted to his department 3.5 years ago, so I sent it to him with a request for it to be expedited, which seemed appropriate since he identified himself as expert technician on the customer emergency response team. My request for a 15-minute telephone interview was a problem, however, causing Limbaugh to refer me to his department head, Scott Levins. No email address came with that referral, nor did Levin's direct telephone number. That's okay. I already had both from NARA's employee locator, allowing me to drop him an email with the same questions and the same deadline. So I did. That was 10 a.m. By noon, I had my response. Levins needed time to read my article and wouldn't be ready for an interview by 4 p.m. No problemo. Thanks to Google Drive, I could still file my article on time and add my interview with Levins later. Meanwhile, I repeated my request to expedite Ford's SF-180 request, but got no response from him. As it happens, Levins makes videos too. He's got one posted on YouTube, just like Shipley does. Levins shows step-by-step how requests for military records are processed, including the time involved, which is normally less than 3.5 years for veterans requesting copies of their own records. According to that video, Levin's facility only keeps records through about the year 2000, which explains the middle finger to Ford's SF-180 request, but not the records that Shipley had. At any rate, Levins doesn't look like the type of guy who'd put up with this facility, or with his facility being used to fuel a private data mining operation like Shipley's, much less how the information he was providing could be used to humiliate decorated veterans. So I sent him a link to my article in progress for comment. This isn't Levin's first rodeo. On December 12, 2012, he testified before Congress in a hearing titled Wading Through Warehouses of Paper. According to that testimony, his operation processes approximately 10,000 Freedom of Information Act requests annually. Go ahead and divide that number by the days in a year, and you'll see Shipley's operation in full swing. at 27 requests a day, which is precisely the number that Shipley processes, or claims to, some of them with veteran Social Security numbers on them, like Ford's. Bloomberg puts the value of black market Social Security numbers at only $3 each, probably somewhat higher for counterintelligence agents and Navy SEALs with complete names and facial images. They can also be sold repeatedly, which makes Shipley's operation look like a genuine gold mine, and Levin's operation look like, well, shit. And I'm going to put on some music until we get past the top of the hour, which is maybe a minute and a half away. And then I'm going to finish reading this article, which I am approximately halfway through at this point. So you'll have to be patient for that. What will I play for you? Something nice, something military, something with a sort of arch kind of a feel to it, something by Eliza Gilkison. I'll be back after this music with more Memo of the Year Good Night Radio on KNYOLP in Fort Bragg, and also by then on KMEC LP in Ukiah, because they grab the stream at midnight and hang on until 3 o'clock in the morning, kicking and screaming, being dragged ever further into the warm, wet nether regions of the night. So back then with even yet more of the story Cowboy School by Scott Peterson. So don't go away.
The Holy Land. Between the Tigris and Euphrates is a lot like hell. Go on, liberate my people and their OIL. Get your big trucks rolling down Highway 9. Put on the armor, it's party time. Gonna dance with the devil of our own design. Rolling down Highway 9.
Middle Eastern sort of fillip on the guitar run at the very end of that. I like that. Eliza Gilkison from, I don't think that's on her Milk and Honey album, but I've got some more music from Milk and Honey to play for you a little bit later. My name is Marco McLean. I'm reading you a radio show called Memo of the Air, Good Night Radio on KNYOLP in Fort Bragg, where I start at 9 o'clock every Friday night, and now at midnight, KMEC grabs the stream too. So I'm also on in Ukiah. So hello, Ukiah, and part of the Redwood Valley anyway. I'm glad to be able to talk to you, and I'd like to read what you write. Send your story or poem or screed or diatribe or whatever to memo@mcn.org. That's MEMO at mcn.org. And I'll read it next week on Friday night on the very next Memo of the Air. And if you tell me that you're sending it from Ukiah, I'll wait until after midnight to read it so that you can hear it on KMEC 105.1 KMEC LP Ukiah. So, did I say KNYOLP Fort Bragg? Because somewhere around the top of the hour I have to say that. Anyway, I'm glad that I have the presence of mind to remember to say Memo of the Year is made possible by supporters of KNYO, and in particular by the Village Toy Store on Lansing and Zoe Office Supply and Copies on Little Lake and Mendocino. Toys and copies 937-4633 and 937-2200, respectively. And in Fort Bragg, Headlands Coffee House on Laurel. Coffee and food and music, 964-1987. Windsong, books, toys, and records on Main Street between Laurel and Redwood. That's books and toys and records, 964-2050. Sage's Computer and the Boatyard Shopping Center, computer repair and malware banishment and knowledgeable advice, 962-0600. And Mendocino Community Network, the internet service this station uses for high-speed access, and I use for reliable dial-up where I can't get high-speed. Out in the wilds of Albion, you can call MCN for information about their various services, wherever you are, 937-1444. And Thanksgiving Coffee, thanksgivingcoffee.com. You can look up their new Smart Coffee app that lets you make a few simple decisions about what you like most about coffee, and it figures out which different beans to get and use and so on, and how to make exactly that. Smart Coffee app. And so, just before I put on that music, and for the 15 minutes leading up to the top of the hour, let's put this over there, I have been reading you a story called Cowboy School by Scott Peterson. And I started tonight with the second third of two-thirds, and now I'm starting on the third of the three-thirds, so that probably it'll take another 10 minutes or so to finish reading you this article. 10, 15, somewhere around there. I'm not going to recap anything. I'm just going to pick it up where I dropped it off. NARA policy says that records are to be archived in the precise arrangement in which they're collected. Each unit is called a fond, meaning background in French. Fond. This helps both the archivist and John Q. Public understand where each record comes from. If NARA personnel actually followed that policy, the 3 pages of Ford's military history that Shipley got came from a particular box, possibly with Ford's complete military record. Even if that record's missing, the box has a provenance where it came from and when, along with other military histories, for the benefit of un-cowboys and the American people. Respect des fonds is the archiving practice that came about after the French Revolution, after a cowboy named Napoleon Bonaparte. That's the system NARA is supposed to use today, for the benefit of all American people, and not just for Shipley. If the people at NARA were true Americans, they'd be able to provide the public with information about that box and its contents under a Freedom of Information Act request. Of course, FOIA, just like they'd done for Shipley. They'd also be able to provide records of all Shipley's FOIA requests and records of all misplaced DD-214s, along with the names of all the veterans who'd requested them, to look for a match between Shipley's FOIA requests and the misplaced DD-214s, for a cause and effect relationship between whistleblowers, Uncle Sam and Shipley. So I submitted that Freedom of Information Act request on October 31, 2016. Trick or treat, Mr. Levins. Shipley insists that resumes are the best place to best place to find fake Navy SEALs. He claims to have spotted hundreds of them. I remember seeing a resume or two in Ford's Foot Locker, so I looked them up. Sure enough, Ford has 2 resumes, but he said nothing about being a Navy SEAL in the first resume. Ditto for the second resume. Could they have been created after Vera Seal busted him? A fax time and date stamp on the first one settled that matter. It was dated October 28, 1998. Shipley's entire beef against Ford rested on the second photograph. Until January 27, 2014, when LTC Sam Waters claimed it on his Facebook page, leaving Mr. Shipley with egg on his face. Then I remembered something from my first interview with him. I had asked what made phony Navy SEALs tick. His response was that most of them were boxed in by years of lies, so I shot him an email. Do you think that goes for phony Navy SEAL accusers? Shipley didn't respond. Not that I blame him, because he'd been boxed in too, all by himself. Those unconcerned about war crimes might be concerned about nuclear weapons, especially in the hands of our enemies. According to Ford, that's what happened. When the 223rd arrived in Iraq, they found arsenals stuffed with high explosives and were completely unsecured. When soldiers in Ford's unit reported it, they were ignored. One of them was Dave DeBatto, who reported that in another... Let me start that again because it's a little confused now. Completely ignored. Got it. When soldiers in Ford's unit reported it, they were ignored. One of them was Dave DeBatto, who reported that in another Cell-On article. DeBatto reported firsthand what it was like, calling it quite a frightening sight. But Ford had gotten there first, finding 5 wooden crates with U.S. markings. Inside of them was something he'd never seen before. As he'd find out later, they were pits, detonators to nuclear weapons, shipped from a weapons development facility at Savannah River, South Carolina. So there were nuclear weapons in Iraq. But not for long. Everything was being moved into Syria, our latest enemy. Now they have nuclear weapons. Ours. Ford reported everything to his commanding officer, Captain Victor Artiga, who then reported it to Colonel Timothy Ryan. Everything went up the chain of command from there, all the way to Dick Cheney, who didn't want to hear it, or anybody else. So the messenger had to be killed by labeling him as psychotic and getting him gone. No matter what the price, cleanup teams could handle the situation from there, running here today, gone tomorrow websites like VeriSeal, AuthenticSeal, and whatever, all of them operated by clueless cutouts like Shipley, to keep treasonous operations like Blackwater in business. Semper Fi, baby. What came down was an operation with an unusual name. Copper Green was first reported by award-winning journalist Seymour Hersh in an article called The Gray Zone in The New Yorker on May 24, 2004, where former Navy SEALs had been, quote, recruited to do Cheney's dirty work, to keep people like Ford from getting in the way. One of them went by the name of Scott and accompanied Ford on his airplane ride out of Iraq. But like Shipley, quote, Scott wasn't the sharpest tool in the box, who wasn't looking as Ford snuck a copy of his own aeromedical paperwork on the way, sending it to his stateside home via DHL from a stopover in Kuwait, putting, quote, Scott on the hook for war crimes too. Smoke and mirrors is a pretty good description for it. Blackwater employees posed as CIA operatives for the entire invasion of Iraq. Under the Special Access Program, Copper Green, they got away with it too, goading National Guardsmen in Ford's unit to beat Iraqi detainees to death, especially those with knowledge of WMD transactions between Cheney and Saddam Hussein, including an aging official named Saad Hassan Ali, the spitting image of actor Robert Young, who'd been robbed of $30 million in cash before being murdered by U.S. soldiers under Copper Green orders. Ford had debriefed him after being captured and identified him as he lay dying. Ford was also present at the raid that netted duffel bags full of cash and saw it disappear. So of course he needed to go. After the raid, Ford watched in horror as Staff Sergeant Spiros Matsenigos hit Ali in the back of his head with a half-inch steel rod over and over again. Ford stopped the so-called interrogation and took Ali to a detention center at Tikrit. But MPs brought Ford back to identify the dying man. On his deathbed, Ali bore telltale marks of that beating, bruising around his eyes. Ford identified him to MPs at the Abu Ghraib infirmary. That was the last straw for Ford, and the Alamo for Dick Cheney. This reporter found no solace investigating Ford's account. Countless times our phone conversations were interrupted by strange noises. Trophy websites were there 1 minute and gone the next, to the point where I decided to set a trap, a sting, if you will, to uncover the source, and I did. It was a private contractor, about the size of Blackwater in self-protection mode, which is just what Blackwater does. In 2009, the Senate Intelligence Committee found that Shipley's former employer went, quote, beyond the simple planning stage to assassinate Iraqis. Then in 2014, it reached the same findings I had, that a private contractor was responsible, like Blackwater. The perps had moved on by then to an organization named Booz Allen Hamilton, where Edward Snowden worked. Snowden got to the same point that Ford had, blowing the whistle on the bad guys, eventually earning a Nobel Peace Prize nomination for it. What he revealed wasn't shocking to me. Booz Allen was monitoring phone calls, millions of them, including mine, to keep the lid on whistleblowers like Ford, who had connected the mistreatment of Iraqi prisoners directly to the White House. When the MP escorted Ford from Abu Ghraib back to the base, he had a pouch with him. Inside were videotapes of so-called interrogations to be on the next plane for Washington, D.C., for Dick Cheney and company to enjoy, ignorant of the health risk they posed. After seeing the abuse, Ford began presenting symptoms of PTSD. Then, after interviewing Ford, I felt them too. It's now known that PTSD is contagious, so everyone who watched those videotapes paid dearly for it, and all the cowboys, even the innocent ones, suffered right along with the people that had been mistreated. Even Google got involved in the cover-up. One of the trophy websites I'd found was the testimony of attorney Scott Horton. It specifically mentioned Ford's abduction as evidence of war crimes charges against White House officials. I found his testimony on Google, but after reporting it to Ford on the telephone, Google blocked it. It was the same for the Kuala Lumpur war crimes judgment. I'd found that on Google too. Now it can only be found on Yahoo. What I was after today could only be found at NARA. With my new best friend, Scott Levins, it seems that Levin's operation had a little problem with the law a few years back. On July 3, 2012, 241 military records were found in the woods near his record center with 300 names and Social Security numbers on them. 2 of Levin's employees were convicted in federal court for either destroying or intentionally misfiling more than 1,000 records, leaving supersized holes in Sontag and Shipley's dragnets, but the destruction was discovered by audits suggesting the existence of an index, and renewed hope in my quest for answers about the origin of the records that Shipley got. My biggest concern was the type of records that were lost. Shipley claims to process 20 to 30 phony Navy SEAL requests a day. The records that Levins lost were all to be refiled, so there's a pretty good chance that some of the records destroyed belonged to Navy SEALs and that the sheer volume of Shipley's requests could be responsible for that loss. Even Levin's average employee has an error rate of 3%, meaning a continuing weekly loss of 3 to 4 files, turning Shipley into a one-man Navy SEAL demolition team. A senator from Oklahoma seems to share my concerns. That's Jim Inhofe, ranking member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. He wrote an unhappy letter to Levins in 2014 over the incident, demanding answers along with what steps Levins was taking to ensure this does not happen again. So I sent, which we'll find out what I sent after I get the paper stuck together. I sent Senator Inhofe a letter putting him in the loop to improve my chances of either getting Ford's complete military file or a reasonable explanation of why I can't. Also to show Senator Inhofe how Donald Shipley's little data mining operation might be jeopardizing the military records of all veterans. Chris Kyle, the famous Navy SEAL sniper, may have been victimized by Levin's sloppy record-keeping. Lacking adequate paperwork, the U.S. Navy credited Kyle with 2 silver stars and 5 bronze stars with valor. In fact, he'd earned only 1 silver star and 4 bronze stars with valor, something the Navy had to fix. Kyle was shot and killed by a former Marine who suffered from PTSD. That was Eddie Ray Routh, who had a difficult time finding treatment, probably because of missing service records. Kyle may have suffered from PTSD himself, incorrectly recalling that he had decked a well-known Navy SEAL, former Minnesota Governor Jesse Ventura, causing Kyle's widow to face a $1.8 million judgment over a defamation lawsuit. Shipley spoke of Kyle's murder during our interview, suggesting that Kyle had outed Routh for being a phony, but it may have been the other way around. Meanwhile, my email to the U.S. Navy got a response. The Special Operations Media representative I spoke with didn't want to be quoted for this article, but they told me something I'd suspected all along, that the U.S. Navy doesn't publish a list of SEAL training graduates. When I asked, the spokesperson wasn't able to tell me the total number either, making me wonder how Shipley came up with 18,000 plus of them, especially after looking at an average-sized graduating class of 30 and no more than 350 graduating classes. It's hard to imagine Shipley making 7,500 graduates out of whole cloth, but PTSD has been known to cause delusions. The biggest offender goes unnoticed by Shipley. That's NavySeals.com, owned and operated by former Navy SEAL Mark Devine, whose website is decorated top to bottom with the Navy SEAL trident against Department of Defense regulations. Shipley's endorsement of Devine's business is hard to miss, especially since an article by him is posted there. DoD regulations work fine inside the military, but not so hot anywhere else. Not anymore. Stolen valor was a law passed under the George W. Bush administration. It flat out prohibited the public display of any Navy SEAL trident by those who hadn't earned it, empowering cowboys before the Iraq debacle. But in 2012, the Supreme Court overturned it. Now, anyone can wear a Navy SEAL trident. It happened in the Golden State, right down the road in Claremont, where a wall-eyed wannabe named Xavier Alvarez faked a Congressional Medal of Honor and got away with it. Shipley acknowledged that decision, but said there was another law that still prohibited it somewhere, something I wasn't able to find. Nonetheless, Shipley and his wife persevere, humiliating anyone foolish enough to wear the wrong medal with online videos. The Shipleys live in a very nice-looking home, but they sure don't act like homeowners, not with the cost of lawsuits these days. According to Zillow, it sold for $1.15 million just last July. It's got a great view, too. Accessible on 3 sides by water, just perfect for a surprise amphibious visit. And at 77 acres, it's ideal for another Cowboy School. Their old place in Chesapeake, Virginia, is valued at $268,577. Zillow doesn't show it being for sale, meaning they probably still own it. By all appearances, the Shipleys have done all right for themselves, so they've got nothing to fear from Dan Bernath. In the event that NARA can't find Ford's military file, there's a turnkey solution. I've got a 68-page index to scans of Ford's entire footlocker, complete with a mock trial in case the U.S. government ever wanted to keep a few cowboys after school. The complete file, scans included, only takes up 3.2 gigabytes, so the 16,088 pages in my Respect des Fonds can be easily replaced, making it unlikely to get lost in the woods. At the 80 cents per scan fee that NARA charges, that's a $12,870.40 value, plus the numbered bait stamps on every page. For a reasonable processing fee, I could make the whole shooting match available to Mr. Levins, complete with a dead man switch to make sure nothing ever gets lost again. Levins promised me a response in an email by, quote, early next week. That email said he'd send me a written response that addresses all of, in brackets, my questions. That week, beginning October 31, 2016, ended on November 4, 2016. So I'm assuming he meant to have me something by 5 p.m. Pacific time on Wednesday, November 2. If I didn't hear from him by then, I'd close this article and move on to the next. Federal law prohibits the destruction of military records. chapter and verse is 44 USC chapter 33, something that Scott Levin's employees hadn't been able to get around. Maybe we could see if Mr. Levins fares any better. Well, he didn't. At around 1:45 p.m. on November 1, I got a voicemail from a fellow at NARA named Kevin Pratt, who couldn't understand the language my FOIA request was written in. Gosh, I've written a number of plain English Freedom of Information Act requests in the United States of America and never got that response. What language did he expect? Hot water's nothing new to Pratt. On November 20, 2014, he testified in a congressional hearing to explain why 4,500 World War II veterans weren't getting any benefits. All of them were Filipinos, most of them in their 90s, who wanted to supplement NARA's shitty record-keeping with copies from their footlockers, stating under oath that NARA processed service determination requests in 10 days or less. That was certainly true for Shipley's request for Ford's military records, but not Ford's request, and Pratt seemed to have no problem understanding congressmen at the hearing. Kenneth J. Ward used the same language that Ford did back when Pratt worked at the VA. It's called plain English, something that got Ward forcibly medicated and marched off to a psychiatrist, just like Ford had been. What a coincidence. Fortunately, I'd found Mr. Pratt's email address on the NARA personnel directory, so I sent him an email suggesting that he use Google Translate if he doesn't understand plain English, because I'm allergic to intravenous Valium. 4 minutes after my deadline, I finally got Levin's written response. He admitted sending Ford's Social Security number to Shipley, claiming it was an accident, at least authenticating what Shipley had sent me. Levin suggested having records of Ford's assignments and geographic locations, but that they were, quote, too voluminous to list on what he'd sent to Shipley. Now we were getting somewhere. If Levins had what he implied, it'd show a gap in Ford's service record, the part where Ford was abducted. Nonetheless, he never explained why Ford got nothing from NARA, while Shipley got everything. At this writing, the body count at Levin's warehouse has risen to over 1,800 missing military records, all of them either destroyed or purposely misplaced. One of them winding up in Donald Shipley's library at Cowboy School.